overreach in light of all the other work of the grid team with regard to the city's summer night lights program. So trying to balance all that. It is up to $150,000, so I think, Reggie, how much has been expended for this summer?
We did about 40,000.
So there is a potential opportunity to continue this value add and then see where it goes in terms of stronger and more broad collaboration with the county. There's certainly opportunities for on the east side of the city, East LA, and the city east side, where we also see crossover and gang issues that perhaps we can explore.
Great. Colleagues? Any questions? Mr. Buscano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Recent news broke, colleagues, Mr. Chairman, that the LAPD came out and announced that we've had one of the safest summers in decades, and I think we can attribute the work of the men and women of the LAPD alongside our community-based organizations and our residents, and quite frankly, I truly feel we've seen the reduction of violent crime in the best numbers in recent history for the summer months because of the gang reduction youth development programs happening throughout our city. So, you know, it's important to bring alongside our county partners, and I do want to recognize and thank County Supervisor, my colleague on the Board of County Supervisors, Mark Ridley Thomas, for agreeing to partner with us, specifically in the South Los Angeles region. So I was at the Watts Gang Task Force just yesterday morning, commending the work that our gang interventionists do day in and day out alongside the LAPD, and happy to see this partnership. And yes, Mr. Chairman, as Ann pointed out, this is the first time we are partnered with the County of Los Angeles for grid programming. And as I've always said, you know, gang prevention, youth development has no borders. Gang crime has no borders. And it's with great hope prior to taking or removing myself as chairman of this committee to have both Chief Beck and Sheriff McDonald present to this committee to see the type of collaboration and partnership that's occurring between both the police department, our police department, and the LA County Sheriff's Department. So I know it's in the works, and looking forward to having that discussion, to having the two principals here leading both agencies to tell us exactly what the collaboration is about. And this is our first step, and I appreciate the support, colleagues, on this item. I know it does impact what's taking place at Jordan Downs. 109th Street was a transition, but talking to Ms. Rodriguez, that unfortunately there's still some lines that folks are afraid to cross. And I believe this item before us will help address those issues. And we hope and pray one day that those fears are eliminated, where folks can clearly cross Central, 103rd, the tracks, as they call them. So I think we're inching our way, and these numbers this last summer proves that there's some great progress being made. So Reggie, I want to recognize you as well, working with the South Los Angeles residents, and specifically in CD15 in Watts. Appreciate your work and your commitment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Great. Well then, without objection, we will approve this motion. Seeing no other questions or comments? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, now that takes us, we've done everything on the docket except for the sort of main discussion item today, which is item number 1. And so we will move to that. Ms. Reynolds. Mr. Espinosa, would you start by reading item number 1?
Item number 1 is a joint report from the City Administrative Officer and Chief Legislative Analyst relative to the 2017-18 budget for street reconstruction and Vision Zero. This was also referred to the Transportation and Personnel and Animal Welfare Committees.
Great. The Street Reconstruction Vision Zero report have been in the works for a long time, colleagues, and I really want to thank all the staff. This has been a product of a tremendous amount of work by the city family. And I guess we could start by bringing the staff from the Bureaus of Street Services, Engineering to the table, as well as Transportation, CAO, CLA's office. We'll just just bring up the whole team. And I think Mr. Fafan may start us out. Welcome, everybody, and we have our GM with us as well. Mr. Reynolds.
Okay, good afternoon, committee members. Matthias Farfan, Assistant Chief Legislative Analyst. And I'm joined with David Hirano from the CAO's office, and we'll start off. And I just want to start by saying that the CAO and CLA worked with these departments to prepare the report before you. I'd like to thank them for all their work. They were very prompt with our requests for information, as well as the CAO's office, who took the lead in coordinating many of the meetings that got us to this point in the preparation of the report. Regarding the basis of the report, the adopted budget includes $44.2 million in Measure M and special gas tax Sb1 funds for street reconstruction and Vision Zero work. Regarding these funds, city departments were instructed to prepare and present a work plan for the funds that includes both street reconstruction and Vision Zero components. They were also instructed to report back on the resources necessary for street striping workload and resources to clean, maintain, and repair bike lanes. The report recommendations include actions necessary to be eligible for funds from the state's Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017, referred to as SB1. These actions in the report include the approval of a SB1 project list in compliance with recently approved state guidelines, and the creation of a new special fund for the receipt and expenditure of SB1 funds in order to facilitate compliance with state SB1 annual reporting guidelines. The report also recommends the redistribution of $19.5 million in Measure M funds to commence design and construction ramp-up for resources for overlapping street reconstruction and Vision Zero work on 6 new projects, as well as resources for striping workload and resources to perform citywide bicycle lane repair and maintenance work. Finally, the report recommends to establish that street reconstruction and Vision Zero projects, that the oversight for these projects be provided by the Street Transportation Projects Oversight Committee with regular status reports to council and mayor. As previously stated, recommendations in this report only include funding necessary to commence design and construction ramp up on the 6 projects. Additional funds will be required to complete design and construction on the 6 projects listed in this report, with funding provided by the new SB1 fund recommended by this report. Also, the estimated costs provided in this report for these projects are rough estimates, so they could change as departments further delve into these projects. Therefore, our officers are recommending 2 additional recommendations be added to this report. The first recommendation is to instruct the CAO, Engineering, Transportation, and Street Services, with the assistance from the CLA and relevant city departments, to report back to council and mayor within 30 days on additional salaries and other resources necessary for 2017-18 work on approved SB1 projects to be funded by the new SB1 special fund recommended by this report. And 2, in preparing the above report back, instruct the CAO and Transportation Department, with the assistance from the CLA's office, to consult with affected council districts on planned Vision Zero treatments for the approved SB1 projects to ensure necessary resources are requested and provided. Finally, city departments are here to answer questions you may have regarding this report. In specific, the recommended SB1 projects, the street reconstruction program, the Vision Zero program, or resources necessary to perform the recommended work plan. All right.
Great. Any additional openers, or are you guys all just here for Q&A?
Yeah, Q&A.
Okay. Maybe tell us a little bit about the formula in terms of coming up with the locations that you did. You know, how was that put together? What's that?
Process that was used.
Good afternoon, Gary Lee Moore, City Engineer. I want to thank the CAO, the CLA, and also the Mayor's Office working so closely with Salida and Nazario, represented by Keith today. In this process, in the city of Los Angeles, there's about 5,400 lane miles of what we call DNF streets. And so those are failed streets. The next thing that, and of course Salita can go in a whole great depth, is that she's identified the high injury network. And within the high injury network, there's 40 priority corridors. And so when we looked at these two, when we mapped these two priority corridors over the DNF streets, there's about 103 lane miles that overlap. So that's kind of how we get down real fast down to a subset that we looked at. Then what happened was the three departments, along with the CLA, CAO, and Mayor's Office, we got together and we met, and we set up 5 guiding criteria that we looked at these priority corridors. 1, we looked at safety benefits, minimizing liabilities. 2, we looked at return on investment, maximizing the miles of poor and fair condition streets fixed. 3, we looked at where we would have community consensus or believed to have community consensus. 4 was the showcase projects demonstrating innovative design and delivery. And 5th was a geographic diversity. So when we did this, we came up with the 6 streets that we have recommended in our memo that was transmitted to the CAO, CLA. That being Avalon Boulevard in Council Districts 8, 9, and 10. I'm not going to go to the limits. I'll just go with the major street name. It was a high injury priority corridor number 7, high injury priority corridor number 18 on Main Street, and then I'll back up. Avalon between San Pedro and 120th, because we all know it's one big city, and then Main Street between Martin Luther King and Imperial Highway. Thirdly, Reseda Boulevard between Parthenia Street to Victory Boulevard. Our 4th project we recommended was Roscoe Boulevard between the 405 freeway to Woodman Avenue. The 5th street we recommended was Temple Street, Beverly to Beaudry. And finally, the 6th street was Venice Boulevard between Arlington and Figueroa. And then we also had a list of projects that we recommended for year 2 out of the 40 projects. And finally, the other projects, we said we would reevaluate them after a few years. And I turn it over to Salita if you want to add anything.
Okay, and so that's sort of the big picture. And then obviously you had 6 is kind of an arbitrary number as well. Why 6, not 5 or 7 or?
We did some preliminary cost to implement these projects. So we know we're working within a budget. Once the city council decides which, as was said here, once you decide which streets, we'll go ahead and refine it at a much more granular level. But we definitely have gotten together. We said, you know, we've got an estimate on what we think the street reconstruction is. We thought about what the Vision Zero components would be, and we had some type of scope. We put a little bit of cost to it so that we thought these 6 projects would be close to the dollars that are available in the first year. We're not saying that we can guarantee all 6 streets, but once the council has given us the direction, we'll go ahead and refine it to the level and proceed with design.
Right, and obviously you have the other 11 that are there, so it may very well expand as the time goes or things fall out. And that kind of thing. Now, do the 6 before us, are they also, I mean, they have, the way you described it, they overlap the high injury network, the reconstruction, but does this mean that there are the top priorities in the high injury network, or are they just the ones that overlap?
So, Salita,
So we went through a process, a community-based process, to whittle down the high injury network, which is about 460 miles of streets in the city, down to 40 corridors, which is about let's say, give or take 90 miles. And so in those 40 corridors, the things that we used to prioritize were, we wanted to identify places that we think are the worst of the worst, so the highest raw number of severe and fatal crashes. Second, locations where you have children and older adults overrepresented in the victims of those severe and fatal crashes. And finally, an overlap with communities of concern in the city's community health atlas. So we had a number of different ways that we were going to prioritize. We put it out and got input from folks about how they thought we ought to go about doing it, and that's what we did to come up with the 40 corridors. So the 6 is a subset of the top 40 that we had identified in our Vision Zero Year 1 action plan that we put out in January.
Now, colleagues, I have a whole lot of questions, but I don't want to hog up the mic, and then, so what I'd rather do is just kind of go back and forth, and I'll continue to add in questions and add some more, but I don't want to have it be 6 different interviews, so to speak. So, Ms. Martinez, you had a question.
Chair, is this on?
Yes, I can hear you.
So I'm going back to the discussion that we had during the budget hearings, and it centered around whether the street services had the capacity to ramp up for such an ambitious street reconstruction and resurfacing program. So my question is, given that not all the funds will be able to be spent in fiscal year 1, does it make sense to take on such a huge endeavor during the first fiscal year?
Well, first,
You recall that conversation, right? I don't want to rehash it.
yes, ma'am. So in order to put together this budget package, we did put together a request for 42 positions for 2 additional resurfacing crews, 2 additional
I
concrete.
can barely hear you, I'm sorry.
So to wrap up for this program, council member, basically we put together a budget package for 2 additional resurfacing crews that can do resurfacing and reconstruction,
2 additional?
2 additional concrete crews, and actually a tree crew as well that will be specifically assigned to perform this work. And so we will ask for additional equipment as needed and any additional support for this program.
Okay. And do we know by now what our Sb1 allocation is going to be for next year? Do we have an estimate?
I'm David Hirano from the CAO's office. We have an estimate. It's approximately $74 million for 18-19. I'm sorry, that's the increase above 17-18. So the total is approximately $130 million.
Additionally, no, there's additionally on top of what we got, there's an additional 74 million coming?
Yes, that's the estimate.
Okay. And in the report, it was noted that both the CLA's office and the CEO think that we could, or you're exploring whether we could hire folks a lot faster so that we can keep the work in-house versus having to contract out. I'm curious because every time we talk about our hiring process, it's so incredibly painful, and that always seems to be the reason why we can't get the work done faster rather than not. So I'm curious whether the timelines, what is the timeline to hire people faster so that they can get out there and do the actual work versus us putting an RFP out and actually contracting the work out. I want to figure out what the timeline is. I want to be realistic about the work. If you're going to be able to get through all those hurdles to hire people on time to get the construction done versus us having to contract this work out. I just want to be realistic and not come back a year from now and say, by the way, our hiring processes are so complicated we couldn't get the work done.
I think your concern is well-founded and something that all of us at the table share. As we move forward, that's one of the things that we're going to have to continue to focus on and figure out. We want to achieve a program that balances out the use of contractors with city staff, and some of the projects that will go to city staff may be decided upon based on different criteria, but we want to make sure that our hiring process is efficient, our contracting process is efficient, and as we move forward, that's just something we're going to have to focus on. And, Matthias said that we're going to be reporting back multiple times as we move this program forward, and that will be one of the things that we will report back on.
And that's one of the things that I think we need to pay close attention to, Mr. Chair. I would like us to get a report on maybe a quarterly basis to report how you're doing on hiring the people that we need to get the job done.
Okay.
And not sit here and say we have to give money back because we couldn't get we couldn't hire enough people to actually get the job done. So can we do that as a
Yeah.
request for you to let us know and report back on how the hiring process is going?
A couple of things you should note. We've had conversations with the personnel department throughout the last couple of months with just this concern, and they have promised to work with everyone to try and expedite hiring and to make hiring easier. They have, through this process and through the Mayor's 2400 process, have focused on maintaining eligible lists and offering timely exams to create eligible lists in a timely manner so that hiring can occur quickly when needed. And they are continuing to do that as well. One of the challenges we're going to face as we implement this program and roll it out is the timing of the completion of design work that's coming from engineering will drive the need for street services crews, as well as the arrival of equipment that's being ordered and built for street services. So there are a few things that kind of need to come together to make this work efficiently, and we're
And I don't mean to doubt you, but again, if all that equipment doesn't show up, if something happens where, we couldn't get the supplies that we needed, and that for some reason ends up with another delay, yet something else that's not getting done. So I would like for us to get a quarterly report on how you're doing that. Okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. In regards to the amount that was allocated to DOT, there was a $900,000 allocation rather than your $5.4 million that you had requested for the paints and the sign crews and all that other stuff. Is this amount sufficient to cover that amount of work expected to be done in the first year?
So I think that we can make it work for the first year.
Is that the polite answer?
That is the professional answer on the record, is that we will make it work for the first year.
That's a big difference between 5.4 that you requested
Yes.
and what you actually got.
I think I would actually draw your attention more to the signal crews that we requested and the date that those positions get turned on is in January. And the signal crews in particular, there's a backlog of work, Vision Zero related work, design is complete, that could be done now, right? That doesn't have to go, some of it coordinates with street reconstruction and some of it doesn't. And I would say that if I had to point to anything in this sort of, and I understand the juggling act of trying to get this all to hang together, if I had to point to something that gives us a little bit of heartburn, it is that we want to unlock and hire those positions sooner than January, because we know that the hiring process by itself takes 8 to 12 weeks aggressively, and then once those folks are on, it's not like they can just go out there and start flipping switches on signals. They have to apprentice, they have to be part of, learn how to do the craft that the electricians do. So I think in general we're comfortable with the allocation. It's more of the timing, and I would say that overall that is the fundamental issue with all of this. It's not that we're not going to get the resources that we would need to do a complete program. It's a cash flow and timing issue. And so we want to front load the things that we know are going to take longer to do, knowing that the money is coming.
As a follow-up to that, as the CAO, can they not hire those folks now, knowing that it takes a certain amount of time so that they'll be ready and on board the moment that they need them?
Yes, we've discussed that with the personnel department. Once council acts to approve these position authorities, the personnel department will allow them to begin the hiring activity immediately, regardless of the implementation date. The date on here would be the first date that they could appear on payroll. If you want to move them up, I think there's 9 positions for DOT that I think Mr. Reynolds is talking about, and 2 in Conad. If you wanted to advance those authorities by a couple months, that would probably be okay.
I don't see any reason why. Tell me if there's any reason why we shouldn't advance them to whatever date the department is asking us. You still have the date that they go on payroll is the date they go on payroll, so our budget stays solid.
Well, practically speaking, I'd be surprised if they were able to actually get an employee on the payroll by November 1st, but so maybe November 1st would be...
Just to basically, as Ms. Martinez is pointing out this problem, and Ms. Reynolds, we want to eliminate even the perception of this problem. So we want to make sure that the departments have the authority to hire the moment that they need, and then the date that they come on payroll is commensurate with the work and the budget and all the rest, but the hiring date should be ASAP. Is there something we need to do in this report to make that happen?
If you would like to make that adjustment, then I
Yes.
guess we would just make the adjustment to attachment C. I draw your attention to the second page, the bottom of the page where it talks about the traffic signal program, the Department of Transportation signal construction section, and the Bureau of Contract Administration signal construction section. I believe those are the positions that would be impacted. So the date on the left column, the beginning date would be whatever date you would want it in this year. So 1/1/18, it could be 11/1/17 or 10/15, whatever it is that you feel would be appropriate.
Okay, so we will call that Amendment A by Ms. Martinez.
Sure, I
Sure.
wanted to finish my thought, but.
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
So we've cleared that one. Vertigo.
Yeah.
This is another one, just to get back to DOT, with my uncertainty of us being able to have people in place to do the work. So this is another item that I would like for us to, on a quarterly basis, bring back to the committee, make sure we're on track, okay? My two final questions, one of them's got to do, so I went back to the report and I saw the list of several of the SB1 projects that were listed. How are you going to phase those in? Because I'm having a hard time following this. The first list notes the list projects that will be prioritized. However, there's a capital improvement budget list of projects as well. So how are we going to prioritize them in relations to the other two lists?
To speak to that, the SB1 guidelines require a list of projects be provided to the state that actually
So those are
identify-
already in?
They're in, and there were a few that were included in the adopted budget as part of the CIP adopted budget. So those are included on the list by default. Those will continue under the regular timeline.
Okay.
The other projects, the 17 that are listed there, are the corridor, the high-energy network corridor projects. And on those, we've listed 6 as being the projects that would be prioritized for the current fiscal year funds. And then the other 11, some work may commence towards the end of this year, but they would be part of next year's work plan. But we've included those because if for some reason one of those 6, a problem is encountered with one of those 6 projects, then those other 11 that are provided on the list could be used to swap out for one
Okay.
of those 6.
I was going to ask, my second question was about how you're going to swap them in,
Yes.
or out, I should say. Okay.
Yes.
And my final question goes to, just in terms of this whole process, will the resurfacing and reconstruction work happen first, and then the Vision Zero improvements come in after, or how are you guys going to work hand in hand? I brought this up during our whole Vision Zero discussion and during budget.
We believe it'll be an integrated approach. If some of the, so on one of the corridors, if, for instance, that we're building a new crosswalk, or even a new signal, if Salita's team was actually building that signal, then we would coordinate before we do the reconstruction in that area. Salita's team would build it. If some of the work comes over and is contracted out in one package, then once again, it would all be together in one package. If it was street services doing the reconstruction component, we would integrate it in so that we're not digging up the street twice. That's what we all will, our goal is to avoid that. It's reconstructing it once.
Mr. Reynolds, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I mean, I think we were able to do that on Los Angeles Street, working with the Bureau of Street Services, where we had some significant complicated signal work, curb work, medians, and the street was being resurfaced. And so all of that work happened together. And I won't say that every time we do that, it's seamless lights out, but that is what's called on here is that we actually improve our skills in that area in an intentional way, and that we actually have the budget to do it, so that we're really going to be great at building true complete streets projects.
Great. That's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And just as follow-up to that, and then Ms. Rodriguez, part of that involves other departments and private utilities having a long-range infrastructure plan, right? Because if they don't, then they're going to be back tearing up the streets in a year or months. So are we doing things to make sure that, along with our long-term thinking, that other departments and utilities and other folks are also using our same timeline for long-term infrastructure so that we don't tear up the streets multiple times?
Typical for projects, there's the notification of utility companies and other departments. This will follow those same processes, and especially once the council, we move forward with the streets, that'll be one of the first things you do is notify the utility companies and make sure that they know while we're doing the designs that in just a few months down the road, we'll be working there. So absolutely, Keith, unless you...
No, you pretty much covered it, Gary. Basically, we send an extensive notification to all stakeholders, property owners, things like that, specifically to utility companies to notify them that we are coming on a certain timeline. And then once we pave that street, they cannot cut that street or touch that street for approximately 1 year to the moratorium for that specific reason.
I would just add that, again, where there's a process in place, but the way it actually plays out on projects does require us to have ongoing and deep partnership with those companies. On the My Figueroa project that we're doing, we ran into a situation where a utility company wanted to they had construction planned and we were going to have the street all fixed, and we were actually able to work with them to change the alignment of what the utility they wanted to relocate in order to make it all work together. But it required, a lot of hands-on time and attention at sort of senior levels to get to that. So to your point, are we incentivizing our partners to do the same kind of integrated capital improvement projects and forecasting and planning? I would say that that's an area where we need to focus. And what we're going to uncover in this process is how to make that work better.
Ms. Rodriguez, and then Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Keith, I don't know, is my mic on? There we go. Keith, going back to the conversation regarding personnel, do we even know that they have a current list available for you guys to hire from?
Specifically for right now, our biggest need is equipment operator, and there is a current list right now that we're actually testing for. And I've had conversations with David about this exact thing, because there are concerns that basically if there is an existing list, yes, we'd like to hire it immediately.
Right.
And so we're working with current lists now and also working with personnel that if we do see the need to create an exam, we will ask personnel to do that.
And then also in the context of this broader conversation, because I know I've also had the conversation with the CAO regarding some of the open positions, that it's literally a flip of a switch, and it's not going to be that much of a problem in order to assure that the departments can hire the personnel that they need to assure that we can get this work done. So in the context of succession planning as well, I know that in the Department of Public Works, just as we have citywide, we're staring at roughly a 50% retirement cliff. Have we, in terms of the conversation with succession planning, and, I look to one of my greatest advisors, Mr. Gary Lee Moore, on that issue, who successfully navigated that. Have we really looked to a broader conversation on not just these immediate needs that we have, but going forward, really identifying some of the hiring that needs to occur in order to assure just even the very basic of services beyond the additional scope that we're talking about is going to be fulfilled? Because I think it's part of that kind of the short-term and long-term conversation that we need to really be thoughtful to making sure that the personnel department is keeping our list current. I know the same is true for the Department of Transportation. And this is one of the struggles that a number of departments are really enduring right now. And I just want to make sure that we, whatever pressure we need to also apply to assure that those lists are current is going to be an important part of the timeliness and whether or not you're able to hire the staff that you need.
In answer to your question, yes, we do look internally at our succession plan as far as training, younger staff. As far as, say, take my position, for instance, we are doing that.
You're not allowed to retire, just so you know.
No.
Okay.
It won't be for a few years down the road,
Okay.
like say 5-6 years. But with that being said, we are having those internal discussions in BSS to look at our vacancy rates, where they are. We know we're losing about 4 people per month on average to attrition for whatever reason, things like that. And so we are making sure that our lists are current. We are asking to hire just to fill our basic vacancies now. And so we are having those conversations internally and externally as well.
And so, Lita, are you able to utilize even some of the hiring hall opportunities for the immediate need on fulfilling some of the positions?
Yes, and we do have a current list for signal electricians, so we're in really good shape. The trick with the engineering class is that actually, because we have had so much retirements now. There's actually people who have come in the department in the last couple of years are actually going to be able to move up really quickly, but those lists are just expiring. We're just tearing through them. So there is a need to be more sort of nimble and have, lists that we keep very present and very current, because there's great talent coming into the department across every classification and huge opportunities to move up because people are, moving off into a golden era.
You good, Monica?
I'm good.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. I think Ms.
Mr.
Rodriguez.
Vizcaino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Ms. Rodriguez can present on this item, sitting on the Board of Public Works Commission for a few years. But thank you for your work. I do want to recognize CAO and CLA for acknowledging the Save Our Streets LA initiative. I believe that was a lot of work in the making, but I know we are turning those pages today on crafting that plan to address our infrastructure and our street network. I too, like Ms. Martinez, I have some concern on the deliverables, on the timeline, and the sense of urgency in a time where there's still skeptics who voted for or not voted for Measure M and Measure R, and skeptical of the state legislator's decision on moving forward on SB1, which all three are going to really contribute to improving our infrastructure and our street network, and at the same time specifically addressing the high, what do you call it, the high injury network, HIN, sorry, the other way around. So with that, aside from the hiring process, my concern in looking at the report that you have major equipment costs, and those equipment costs like grinders, pavers, sweepers, are those one-time costs, or last time I checked, I just saw a paver and a street sweeper. Why can't we use our existing equipment to start the work?
So it's approximately $8 million for that equipment, and say for that a coal milling machine or paving machine, the expected life expectancy is 7 years approximately on a piece of equipment like that. And so we do have an existing fleet, you're absolutely right, that we can use to basically supplement until we get the newer equipment on board to perform this work. And we would require, of course, GSD to help us support and maintain that equipment. But that is a one-time cost. If the scope of work expanded, then we may need to buy additional equipment if needed.
And these are all made-to-order equipment, is that my understanding?
Yes, basically we're not ordering anything with any special bells or whistles, any specialized equipment, nothing like that. Whatever's on the shelf that's available right now on the market, we will buy. And we have cooperative agreements where basically we've eliminated, we've cut months off of the purchase process.
So those pieces of equipment that are not available to buy, can we lease instead of waiting until they manufacture and get them delivered to the city?
Yeah, there is lease options for that, and we've actually in discussions with vendors right now to see what the availability is on some of this equipment, so we are working on that.
Got it. I know we have debated this body and also in council that some of those dollars have been left on the table, and every fiscal year we question, like, why did we not spend the money? And this is an important project, and again we have to. We owe it to those who voted on these measures, so we do not need to delay. We cannot delay. There ought to be a sense of urgency. And speaking of urgency, I do know that there's a timeline on SB1 projects. There's an October deadline, and if we make any other major changes, are we going to have any issues meeting that deadline on the SB1 dollars?
Councilman, the deadline you're referring to is October 16th, and that is the deadline that the state has set for us to submit a project list for the use of SB1 funds. That project list has to be approved by the council and mayor as a budget amendment or part of the adopted budget, and then submitted by staff to the state. So we would need council and mayoral approval of the project list a couple days prior to the 16th so that we could actually get the information up there in the format.
So David, how confident are you that we're going to get these projects approved in Sacramento?
The state has
And
made...
what happens if we don't get them approved?
Well, the state has pretty much said that they're not in the project approval business. They want the list to be submitted as long as they qualify and meet the eligibility requirements of the statute. That they're not really going to be specifically approving the projects themselves. But if we don't meet the requirements set forth to submit a list on time with eligible projects in the format that they want, then we will not be eligible for the receipt of Sb1 monies until we do meet that.
Good, so they value local control of these projects.
Right.
Let me just add to that. The complete process is the city would provide the list to the California Transportation Commission, and they would review it, as David mentioned, for that it contains all the information they require for these projects as far as location and what's entailed in each project. If it meets those standards, then they would go ahead and forward a list of cities that have complied with those list requirements to the state controller, and then the state controller then would just, when they allocate the funds in January, mid-January, then the city of LA would be part of that allocation. If cities that do not comply with that list submission process, they run the risk where their allocation would then be lost for that period, and it would get allocated to the cities that did comply.
Got it. Thanks, Matthias. And lastly, if I can, Mr. Chairman, there's been a lot of noise throughout the city on the Vision Zero projects. And I understand in page 4 of the report, one of the steps is to identify which projects to move forward with a degree to which there's community consensus. So what does that mean? What's that community outreach look like in these specific high-injury networks that are going to be overlapped with the reconstruction of streets? Or has there already been an effort being made? What can we expect?
So I can take that one. When we identified these 40 corridors at the beginning of the year, we immediately went through an initial sort of screening process and determined which ones we thought we could go out and do safety enhancements right away, and notifying and working with neighborhood councils, business groups, schools, and council offices. And we completed those on about 15 corridors. So we've upgraded over 400 crosswalks. We've upgraded about 120 intersections. We've put in about 110 speed feedback signs along these corridors. There were others that were where there had been an outreach or design process underway, about 10 of those. And then the remaining 15 required additional outreach to sort of understand what the community's desires were in terms of the kinds of trade-offs that are entailed in really reaching a positive safety outcome. So that outreach has been ongoing in partnership with the council offices that actually, where those corridors lie. So council offices co-hosting community meetings along with the Department of Transportation. We've also contracted with community-based organizations that do outreach and that work in these communities to assist with that as well. And I would say that that's sort of that's the approach. For a couple of them, we actually went to the trouble to actually build out the project for a day using temporary materials as part of a community festival or other things, so people can really get a sense of what the project will look like. Now, no outreach process is perfect, and it is impossible to reach every single person who will experience the changes on the street. And so we try as much as possible to use data and evaluation, and to continually go back out to communities, share information, and be transparent, and be open to making adjustments to designs. We did that on Reseda. We've done it in other parts of the city where we put something out there. It didn't work exactly as we had hoped, or the community wanted us to be even more aggressive in some cases, and we go out and we make those adjustments. So I think the intention here and our interest is we want to get some great projects delivered, and we know that that is not possible without the support of the council office and the consensus from the community.
Right.
So that's really our starting point. We're not really interested in going out and putting something in the ground that we think will need to go back in and take out. So we want to be very sure and very certain, which I think is the reason for the second suggested amendment from the CAO and the CLA, that what we're putting out there is going to be a point of pride for the community. These should be showcase projects. You know, when you tear a street down to the studs, when you put in curb extensions, when you have the opportunity to put in brand new signal infrastructure, these should be streets that everybody is proud of in their communities, and that's the bar.
First 9 of many to come, so
Exactly.
really appreciate that. Thanks for that response, Lena. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I concur with Councilmember Buscaino. I mean, we had a lot of heated debate during the last budget season, and I'm pleased that we were able to identify a number of streets in our high injury network that were also in need of major repair. But I just want to make it clear, street reconstruction is much about public safety as it is for Vision Zero, because as we've seen in the past couple of years, the city has paid out tens of millions of dollars due to accidents occurring because of poor conditions of our streets, sometimes fatal accidents caused by cracks, potholes, and uneven pavement. And this is such a basic question, but I still want to ask it. And you elaborated about how these streets were identified in the beginning. Can you state on whether any departmental risk managers were involved in these discussions about these street selections?
No departmental risk managers were involved at that level when we selected these streets. They were based on the high injury network and those that had failed DNF streets. For instance, they had to be on the high injury network and have a good component of DNF streets.
Well, going forward, I mean, I think it's because I know in one of our previous lawsuit cases, we had the risk manager from the department there as well. But, like the Bureau of Street Services risk managers, they have a working list of streets in addition to those like streets that have claims filed on them or pose a potential liability, because they might, going forward, while some streets might not be on the high injury network, they could still pose a liability and a risk.
So in answer to that question, Councilmember, basically our risk manager, we do have that list of locations that basically we are inspecting right now to come up with an action plan to address those streets specifically. Going forward, I know that when we do our typical pavement preservation program, it's driven by micropaver, of course, but that is something that we can take into consideration, of course, that we're having an issue on a specific street. Maybe that's something that should be addressed for various reasons, obviously. We also encourage people, of course, to use 311 when possible, basically to assist in basically filling those potholes when needed. But I agree we can take a more proactive approach when it comes to litigation.
But definitely the Sb1 money could be used for, because I know we have for measure and return, a local return portion is a more high injury networks, but then Sb1 is a little bit more broader in scope, right? And we could use it for these liability, high injury risk streets.
Yeah. So just a follow-up, we are putting together street services, different budget scenarios for different funding sources for like Mix 1781, code in place recycling, things of that nature, and just our cool pavement in relation to, like, say, dealing with DNF streets specifically.
And I know during the budget discussion this past year, we also talked about concrete streets. Can you comment on if there's any concrete streets in the current Sb1 expenditure plan?
On the 6 streets that we've proposed to you, one of the streets, the Venice between Arlington and Figueroa, does have about 2.3 miles of concrete lane miles on it. So one of the 6 streets does have some concrete.
Wait, is it Venice to Arlington, or is it the MLK one?
I believe that it's the Venice between Arlington and Figueroa. I'm sorry. You are correct, Councilmember. It's Maine between MLK and Imperial Highway.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was looking at the summary and not the individual line.
While it's only a very small percentage, I just wanted to point that out and say thank you for that. But how was that street selected? The concrete street, that is. Or was it just a portion of it? Just happened to be that street happened to have a portion being concrete.
It was not one of the criteria. It happened to be one of the result of picking that corridor for those other reasons, and it had the concrete as part of it.
So have you guys started a discussion on figuring out concrete streets, on which streets will be selected going forward?
So your question was, as regard to the high-entry network and the street reconstruction, we have,
Or just street reconstruction in general, probably more with the SB1 expenditure plan. If you guys start a discussion for how to repair concrete streets, or how to make the selection criteria for it.
Councilman, I'm not sure that we have really gone down that path as to which streets will be reconstructed using concrete. I know the Bureau of Street Services has talked a lot about, in some instances, achieving reconstruction through an overlay of asphalt on those, and then there are other areas where we know the community will not accept that. So I think that's an area where we're going to have to develop additional criteria and focus as we move this program forward. But there are a lot, as you have identified, there are a lot of issues associated with implementing a program of this magnitude in terms of street reconstruction, and then there's even more when you overlay it with Vision Zero. So in order to get the programs both going, we need to kind of be selective about where we start. And you're right, we will have to pay additional attention to how we develop and reconstruct concrete streets.
Yeah, and that's very important to me, and I'd like to make sure that you include that discussion, because in certain areas, with like HPOZs, the city required the neighborhoods to only have concrete, as well as hillsides. It's a public safety issue as well, in many of our hillsides where it's concrete, and as we know, for concrete streets haven't been repaired in the past 80 plus years. And sometimes we just keep on doing asphalt patches over asphalt patches, and it's a huge liability. So in areas where it can be converted to asphalt, I mean, so be it, but we need to have some sort of a plan to tackle the concrete streets, because it's actually more widespread than most people think. And I'll just wrap it up real quick, but I just wanted to add the discussion earlier that was had about coordinating services with utilities and all of that. I know we spoke ever since I've gotten to office with Salida and DOT. One of your projects that you were always pushing for is Office of Construction Coordination. And that is something, and I know you guys already coordinate within the departments, but to take it to another level, this is a project that I've been pushing at every budget cycle. But could this be something that could be used by, whether it's Measure M or SB1, could Office of Construction Coordination qualify?
Councilmember, to the extent that the work that's being coordinated is eligible from Measure M or SB1, yes. To the extent that the work is not, if it's more B permit related, for example, then no. So but if it's road work, street work, then,
I think there's an opportunity to explore that as well, because the Office of Construction Coordination would be a preemptive measure, so that we don't have to do it on a project by project basis and have it all laid out. So I just want to re-acknowledge that. And for hiring, I want to thank Councilmember Rodriguez and Martinez for bringing that up. I know when I was on the Personnel Committee, I mean, what they're saying exactly falls in line with what we already agreed to do and made a contract with the Coalition of City Unions that we're going to have 5,000 new hires, and we're nowhere near hitting that goal. So, I mean, by us hiring, I mean, helping you is helping some of the commitments that we already made. So I can't stress enough what the other council members have been talking about hiring. And lastly, year two. You mentioned, I know this list has year one, but you said there's year two. Am I missing the year two list?
Okay. All right. Well, if you go to the list, well, it's attachment A. It has a list of the SB1 project list, but they're also reiterated on attachment E, which may make it a little bit easier to read.
So is it number 7 through 17 is year two?
Yes. Well, those would be projects that could replace projects in the top 6 if for some reason there's a delay. For instance, if there's going to be a major utility replacement in one of those corridors and we need to delay the commencement of that, then it could be swapped out, but it would also provide a basis for next year's work plan. Now, the guidelines do dictate that these lists need to be adopted each year in an adopted budget.
Okay.
So it would depend on what the mayor's proposed budget includes.
Okay, that was my central point. These could provide a guideline, but I know at the last budget cycle we approved for 1 year. So next year, pending what I mean, I'm sure there'll be a lot of lessons learned from this year. But
Yes.
next year, not that there'll be a drastic change, but there could be. And we could have a different priority and have different streets.
Yes, this list may be amended year to year. Even mid-year, it could be amended. The only requirement is that every year we will need to report by October 1st what we've expended on each of these projects once they commence.
Just wanted to make sure that year 2 wasn't already solidified, because I don't remember voting on that. So,
That's
but thank you.
correct. That's correct.
And just, and following up on, so the SB1 list is not set in stone. We can amend it even 6 months from now. It doesn't have to be amended on a yearly basis. If we have a reason to amend it, we can do it.
That's correct.
Right. So which, for all of us, should take a little bit of the pressure off in terms of that, because we know that we can make those changes. Also following up on the discussion about the hiring, on page 6 of the report, Street Services talks about wanting 4 urban forestry positions, and there was some recommendations about holding off. We always have constituents, on our back about tree trimming, so I just wanted to alert you, I'm going to recommend, in addition to the recommendations, that we do include these 4 positions. We add them now so that ultimately we're going to approve in the recommendation today Street Services requests for all 42 positions. And then obviously they need to be hired appropriately, but we want to put that into our request.
Councilmember, that's fine if you'd like to do that. Let me describe the reason that they're not in here. We met with Street Services and went over all the positions and work, and we were not convinced that the workload related to the street reconstruction program in its early stages would be able to support 4 full-time positions on urban forestry crew. We don't doubt that there is work related to urban forestry, and it's additional work above and beyond what they're currently doing, but is there enough to support a full-time crew? That's the only difference we have with the Bureau on that. So if you were to go ahead and do this, which you obviously can do, we would track the workload that's associated with the reconstruction closely, and that would be the work that would be eligible for payment out of Measure M or SB1. If those resources are redirected to normal tree trimming, it's possible we may need to find another funding source for it, or that the Bureau might need to come up with savings from another source, and we'd have to deal with that in maybe the mid-year or one of the FSRs as we move forward. Okay.
Understood. Thank you. Did you follow up, Mr. Rubin?
Mr. Chair, yes, I'm sorry. If you are making some amendments, I was wondering if we could, my office is working with other council members on legislations that would start addressing the liability of the various condition of our streets, irrespective of the high injury network. So I was wondering if we could possibly include a recommendation in the committee's report to instruct the Bureau of Street Services and the Department of Transportation, with the assistance of the city attorney, to also include the consideration of potential liability in the development of future work and expenditure plans.
I'm happy to accept that as an amendment, and we'll put it forward. Is there any objection from any colleagues? Seeing none, we will include that as one of our amendments as well when we move forward. A couple other, I think, relatively minor questions, but on page 10 of the report, you note the difference between the normal gas tax and the new SB1 revenues that have caused you to have recommendations to have separate funds, and I didn't really understand that and wanted to understand better. Are there different requirements for the SB1 funds versus the regular gas tax, and how, and I guess it may or may not be related to that, but there were guidelines that state adopted on SB1 on August 17th that you referred to on the previous page, on page 9, and I didn't know if there were any changes with regard to that we need to know about. So I wanted to better understand those guidelines and the differences between SB1 money and gas tax money.
Okay. Yes, there are differences between the SB1 and the normal gas tax allocations. The normal gas tax allocations come to us pretty much regular. We don't have to apply for them. It's a monthly distribution to the city. With SB1, we only will get those distributions if we comply with the process requirements that the California Transportation Commission has set up. And that process requirement we've described before requires project lists to be adopted by the council and mayor and submitted in a timely fashion in proper format to the state on an annual basis, and requires us to disclose our prior year expenditures on a timely basis as well.
So is it safe then to say that it's not that you're having different funds, not because there are different eligibility requirements, it's a different process requirement. So it's the universe of roads that you can fix with SB1 is the same as you could with gas tax, but you have to have it, you have to go through this process on the SB1. Is there some other eligibility difference?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons, yes, is that there's this process change. There's also a difference in terms of the way the city is looked at in terms of maintenance of effort. There used to be a maintenance of effort provision for state gas tax. We were relieved of that back in 2012 by the state, but with SB1 there is now a new maintenance of effort provision that we have to worry about, and the maintenance of effort requires that we spend our existing discretionary monies, primarily general fund monies and gas tax monies, at a level consistent with where we were before SB1 came into place, because the goal of SB1 was to provide supplemental funding, not to provide general fund relief for local jurisdictions. So we're still working through the details of what that means. So I see the look on your face. If you're going to ask me about details, I'm not sure we have it, but Matthias and I are trying to figure out the details so we can give you a more complete report on that. In addition, the state has emphasized to us that one of the goals they have with SB1 is transparency and accountability. So they're going to be taking all the information that we submit to them and putting it up on a website and trying to be as transparent as possible with taxpayers, and they're going to be trying to hold us accountable for results and for doing what we tell them we're going to do. So to the extent that we separate this out into a separate fund, it makes it easier for us from the accountant standpoint, but also makes it easier for our constituents to see what's going on and for us to be transparent with what we're funding and us to be accountable for what we're funding as well. So there are a variety of reasons as to why we've made this recommendation to separate out these funds at this time.
Yes, and I would just like to add, we will be required to report every October 1st on the revenues received in SB1 funds and how we've expended those funds. So we will be required to track those funds that way. Having them mixed in with the regular gas tax funds may make that a little bit more difficult for our accountants. If they're in their own special fund, it'll make it much easier to track what we received in cash and how much of it's been spent and how much is still sitting there.
Okay, makes sense. The maintenance of effort thing, was that part of the whole triple flip?
No, the triple flip is done and over with, so yeah.
But
that was just gas tax.
Okay. Well, not important to get into that, but I think there may be a cause reaction there. But separate issue in terms of making sure we're being strategic. The city's long-range plan is the general plan's mobility element. The plan designated networks of streets, including the Vehicle Enhancement Network, the VEN, Transportation Enhanced Network, TEN, Bicycle Network, Neighborhood Enhancement Network, Pedestrian Network. It all calls for green streets to reduce stormwater runoff. What are we doing to ensure that the street reconstruction effort prioritizes the build-out of these networks? And what are we doing to ensure that when we reconstruct a street, it's built to include the features that are called for by the different designation of the mobility element? And just as an example, like on Reseda and Maine, they're both part of both the TEN and the BEN. Avalon and part of Roscoe are both part of the BEN. Venice is part of the TEN. All 6 streets include the PED. So do each of these projects include improvements that are called for under the mobility element, or at least as an aspiration of some sort?
So I'll take that one. When we went out at the beginning of the year and took those 40 corridors, and we had strike teams from around DOT that looked at each corridor and made a recommendation that would be consistent with the mobility plan. And then took that recommendation out through a community process and out, to council offices and so on and so forth. And what I would say is that, we're not in the business of widening streets. We're not adding, we're not adding new dirt. And so if you want to create a bus-only lane, or you want to create a protected bike lane, or sometimes if you even want to create a wider sidewalk, something else has to give. It has to come from somewhere. And that's extraordinarily challenging on streets that run through people's neighborhoods that represent, you know, their daily commute. And what I would say where we've landed on most of them is a step towards what is envisioned in the mobility plan, some closer than others. But in every single case, I would say what we've landed on are, at a minimum, improvements that we think lead to safer outcomes. And so, you know, the intention was to go out and sort of do that process and bridge that gap between a long-range plan and a vision and, you know, when you get the dirt under the fingernails and you're actually trying to make those trade-offs in real time. And, you know, there's, as I'm sure you're aware, community processes can take many years. Some ideas are ideas whose time hasn't come yet. But our opportunity was to go out and at least present these ideas and sort of engage in a conversation with the community. So it was absolutely our interest and our goal to use the mobility plan as our guiding light in terms of what we would propose, and then work with the community to get to something that we thought was a good move in that direction.
Great. And I guess my last question. The report states that a subsequent report will evaluate the process of the design phase of the street reconstruction work. What is the timeline for that evaluation in the subsequent report?
Well, that was in my presentation. There's two additional recommendations we're requesting be added to the report, and one of them has to do with instructing departments to report back within 30 days with that update as far as where the design is at and what resources are required to make sure that no changes have occurred.
And I would just add is we've got to go through the first set of streets and get the designs complete. So, you know, we're probably coming back to you in 6 to 8 months to give you that feedback after we've finished the first design. And as we've talked about the whole integration and any process improvements that we might see.
Great. Colleagues, any additional questions or comments? Great. Seeing none, I'm going to move that we approve the CAO-CLA report along with the amendments noted by Mr. Farfan of the CLA's office and the amendment to the attachment C to allow DOT to begin hiring October 1st, 2017, and including Councilwoman Martinez's request for all departments to report back quarterly on the process. I also want to approve all 42 positions requested by the Bureau of Street Services and Councilmember Rue's recommendation to instruct the Bureau of Street Services and the Department of Transportation with assistance from the City Attorney to also include consideration of potential liability in the development of future work and expenditure plans. Well, actually, before we move that, we got one late card on this, so all of you, thank you very much. And before we formally vote on it, we have one card from Mr. George Scarpellis from Hollywood. It came in late, but Mr. Rue actually asked that we hear this, and I certainly want to honor that. And Mr. Scarpellis, thank you for, right there is fine, from the podium. We appreciate you coming down, and happy to take your card before we vote. So go ahead.
Thank you for squeezing me in. I appreciate that. My name is George Scarpellis. I'm from the Vice President of the Hollywood United Neighborhood Council. I just want to mention that I know that none of CD4's area is being covered by this. And I understand there's a lot of work, and I appreciate all the work that the panel did. But our streets in hillside communities are terribly impacted as D and F Street, and if I may say F minus, if we could include that in there. And they are public safety hazards because the city has never enforced building of sidewalks. So these streets are where the people walk, where people walk their dogs, where they go for runs, where they go to get a cup of sugar from their neighbors. And these streets are terribly impacted. They're, you know, pushed up, and you can see there is an accident waiting to happen. And so to consider public safety, not just in terms of pedestrian, you know, crosswalks and such, but to consider these as pedestrian ways because there are no other ways, I think is important that the council consider that as well. And it's germane to what you're spending your money on.
Absolutely, Tremaine, and thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for your comment.
I appreciate it.
So without objection, we will approve the CAO-CLA report as stated just a moment earlier. Seeing no objection, it is so ordered. Mr. Espinosa, do we have anything else on the docket?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.